You know, they say that good fences make good neighbors. But in my experience, sometimes a good fence just exposes the neighbor for who they really are, and sometimes it exposes a 26-year-old lie that can bring an entire community to its knees. I never wanted to be the guy that 120 families hated. I never wanted to be the villain in their suburban story. But when you threaten a man's peace, when you come after his livelihood, and try to bully him off the land he paid for with his own sweat and savings, well, you sort of force his hand, and I've got pretty big hands. My name is Elias Thorne. I'm a retired structural engineer, a man who spent 40 years calculating load-bearing walls and stress fractures in concrete bridges. So I know a thing or two about pressure, and I know exactly where to push to make a structure collapse, whether it's a building or a corrupt homeowners association. It all started on a Tuesday morning in late September, the kind of morning that feels crisp and golden, where the air smells like pine needles and possibilities, and I was driving my beat-up Ford F-150 down a narrow gravel road that wound through a thick line of oaks, heading toward a slice of paradise I had just bought at a county auction 3 weeks prior. It was the old Miller Tract, 12 acres of untamed forest, marshland, and a spring-fed lake that stretched about 4 acres across, a place that had been forgotten by time and development. And for a guy like me who just wanted to fish in silence and maybe build a small cabin to grow old in, it was worth every penny of the $215,000 I laid down for it. I was humming along to the radio, already visualizing where I was going to put the dock, when suddenly a silver Mercedes SUV came flying around the bend like a heat-seeking missile, kicking up a cloud of dust that would choke a horse, and slammed on its brakes right in the middle of the road, blocking the entire width of the gravel. I stopped, confused, thinking maybe there was an accident or a downed tree, but then the driver's door flew open and out stepped a woman who looked like she had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in entitlement and expensive haircuts. She was wearing a white blazer that was dangerously clean for a dirt road, navy slacks, and a look on her face that could curdle milk from 50 paces away. And she didn't walk. She marched right up to my driver's side window. "You need to turn that rust bucket around right now," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, not even waiting for me to roll the window all the way down. "This is a private gated community road, and you are trespassing." I leaned back in my seat, resting my arm on the door frame, trying to keep my heart rate steady because I've got a bad ticker and my doctor told me to avoid stress, which is exactly why I bought a lake in the middle of nowhere. "Morning to you too, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice low and slow. "Name's Elias Thorne. I just bought the Miller property up ahead, own the lake and the woods around it, just heading in to check the property lines." Her jaw tightened so hard I thought a tooth might crack, and she leaned in closer, invading my personal space with the scent of aggressive perfume and hostility. "I don't care who you think you are or what swamp you think you bought," she spat out, enunciating every syllable like she was speaking to a slow child. "I am Pamela Vance, president of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, and this road belongs to us. It is for residents and authorized guests only, and you are neither." She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen with a manicured nail, and held it up to my face, showing me a draft email addressed to the HOA board with the subject line "Hostile Trespasser." And below that was a photo of my truck she must have taken while she was speeding toward me, along with a paragraph describing me as a vagrant attempting to breach community security. "Leave now," she said, her eyes cold and dead as shark eyes, "or I will have the sheriff here in 10 minutes, and I will press charges for trespassing, harassment, and damaging community infrastructure." Now, I'm an engineer. I deal in facts, in blueprints, in black and white realities. And looking at this woman, I realized she wasn't operating on facts. She was operating on pure, unadulterated power, the kind that comes from never being told no in your entire adult life. I could have argued. I could have pulled out the deed from my glove box, but instinct told me that showing my hand this early in the game was a strategic error, so I just nodded, put the truck in reverse, and backed up a quarter-mile until I found a spot wide enough to turn around, leaving her standing there in the dust, looking like she had just defended the Alamo single-handedly. But as I drove away, watching her silver Mercedes shrink in my rearview mirror, my mind wasn't on retreat. It was on the map I had glanced at briefly when I bought the place, a faded surveyor's map from 1975 that showed something very interesting about that specific stretch of gravel road. That evening, I cleared off my dining room table, poured myself a glass of bourbon, neat, and spread out every single document I had received at the closing. The deed, the title insurance, the plat maps, the surveys, everything. I turned on my heavy brass desk lamp and went to work, tracing the property lines with my finger, following the meets and bounds descriptions that read like a foreign language to most folks, but read like poetry to an engineer. And there it was. On the 1975 survey, drawn in faint pencil but clearly marked, was a line labeled Private Access Easement, Parcel 14B, which was my land, and the road Pamela Vance claimed belonged to her precious HOA ran smack dab through the middle of my property for a solid 300 yards. I sat back in my chair, the bourbon warming my chest, and felt a slow smile spread across my face because according to this map, the Pine Ridge Estates HOA didn't own that road. I did. I didn't sleep much that night, my brain buzzing with the implications, so by 8 a.m. the next morning, I was standing at the counter of the county recorder's office, a place that smells like old toner and dusty paper, asking the clerk, a nice lady named Betty who looked like she'd seen it all, to pull every record on Parcel 14B going back to the Eisenhower administration. Betty disappeared into the back and came out 20 minutes later with a cardboard box that looked like it hadn't been opened since Disco was dead, and I spent the next 4 hours sifting through deeds, liens, and transfers. Here is what I found. In 1962, the original 40-acre tract was split, and my 12 acres were carved out with a private driveway. In 1973, Old Man Miller bought it. Then in 1998, a developer bought the surrounding land to build Pine Ridge Estates. The developer, in a rush to save money, simply paved over Old Man Miller's private driveway to use as the main entrance for the new subdivision, assuming nobody would notice or care because Miller was a hermit who barely left his house. But here was the kicker, the smoking gun that made my hands shake just a little bit as I held the paper. There was no recorded easement. There was no legal document, no transfer of rights, no agreement granting the HOA permission to use that road. They had just squatted on it for 26 years, assuming that because they laid asphalt on it, they owned it. I paid Betty $18 for certified copies of everything, walked out into the bright morning sunlight, holding a leather folder that contained the legal equivalent of a nuclear warhead, and drove home feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. That afternoon, the email arrived. It was from Pamela, sent on behalf of the board of directors, and it was nasty, a formal notice of violation accusing me of unauthorized entry, threatening a fine of $500 per incident, and warning that they had already contacted their legal counsel, a firm called Caldwell and Associates, to seek a restraining order. She was trying to bully me into submission before I even had a chance to speak, trying to bury me in paperwork and legal threats so I'd just sell the land and move on. But she didn't know she was picking a fight with a guy who reads fine print for fun. I replied simply, Ms. Vance, I suggest you check the county records regarding Parcel 14B before you send any more threats. The road is mine. You are the one trespassing. Her response came 3 minutes later. Your delusions are not my problem. Do not contact me again or I will call the police. Fine, I thought. If you want a war, let's have a war. I called up an old friend of mine, Henry, a real estate attorney who had retired to fish but still kept his license active for special occasions, and I told him the story. Henry laughed so hard he started coughing, and then he said, Elias, you have them by the short and curlies. Technically, you could put up a gate tomorrow and lock out 120 families, but if you do that, they'll sue you for prescriptive easement, basically squatters' rights, and drag this out for 5 years. So what do? I asked. We send a cease and desist, Henry said, his voice turning sharp. We lay out the facts. We give them 14 days to acknowledge your ownership, and we offer to negotiate a lease. If they refuse, then we escalate. We sent the letter via certified mail, and I waited. I expected pushback, maybe a tense meeting, but I didn't expect Pamela to weaponize the entire neighborhood against me. 4 days later, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Friends from town were forwarding me Facebook posts from the Pine Ridge community page, where Pamela had posted a picture of my truck and my face, labeling me a predatory land grabber, and claiming I was trying to extort the community and hold their children hostage by blocking the road. The comments were vicious, hundreds of people calling me scum, trash, saying they should come down to my property and teach me a lesson. And then came the official letter from the HOA board. They weren't negotiating, they were doubling down. They announced a special assessment, a fee levied on every single homeowner, of $150 per household to fund an emergency legal defense fund to fight me, raising over $18,000 to pay their fancy lawyers to sue me for property they didn't own. I was furious, sitting there at my kitchen table, my blood pressure rising, thinking about how she was using these people's money to fight a battle she had already lost. But then Henry called me with a piece of information that changed everything. "Elias," Henry said, "I did some digging on Pamela Vance, just a hunch, but I found something interesting." "What is it?" "She owns 3 other lots down by the water, not part of the HOA, just adjacent to your land. She bought them under a shell company called Blue Heron LLC about 5 years ago using her maiden name." "So? She likes land." "Maybe," Henry said. "But I also found a preliminary development contract filed with the County Planning Commission 6 months ago between Blue Heron LLC and a company called Apex Resorts, a massive developer of ecotourism glamping sites." I went silent, the gears turning in my engineer brain. "The contract guarantees Apex Resorts direct lake access," Henry continued. "And the only way to get to those lots and the lake is your road." "She sold them access she doesn't have?" I whispered. "Exactly," Henry said. "She thought she'd win the auction for the Miller Tract, secure the whole shoreline, and cash in on a multi-million-dollar deal. You outbid her, Elias. You didn't just buy a lake, you killed her retirement plan. That's why she's fighting so hard. It's not about the HOA, it's about her wallet." It all clicked, the aggression, the lies, the desperation. She was using the HOA's money, the neighbor's money, to sue me so she could secure an easement for her private business deal. And if I blocked that road, she would be in breach of contract with Apex Resorts, which would likely sue her into oblivion. "Henry," I said, a cold calm settling over me, "draft a counterclaim. Trespassing, damages for 26 years of unauthorized use, and attach the Blue Heron contract as Exhibit A. Let's see how she likes transparency." We filed the counterclaim, and the reaction was immediate. Pamela's lawyer, a tired-looking guy named Caldwell, called Henry begging for a settlement meeting, trying to keep it quiet. But I said no. I said I wanted a public forum. I told Henry to inform the HOA board, not Pamela, but the other members, that I would be attending the next monthly meeting to present a peace offering, and that if they refused to let me speak, I would put up a toll booth on the road the next morning. They agreed. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and stale coffee, and it was packed, standing room only, over 200 people, all of them looking at me like I was the devil himself. Pamela was sitting at the head table, looking pale, her hands gripping the microphone like a lifeline, and when I walked to the front, the room went dead silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a tornado. "Mr. Thorne," Pamela said, her voice trembling slightly, "you have 5 minutes." I stood there, facing the crowd, facing the people who had called me names online, who had threatened me, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt pity. "My name is Elias Thorne," I started, my voice echoing slightly, "and I'm the guy who owns the road you drove on to get here tonight." A murmur went through the crowd, angry whispers. "I didn't come here to block your road," I continued. "I came here to tell you the truth. For 26 years, your HOA has been using my private property without an easement. I have the deeds right here." I held up the certified copies. "Lies," someone shouted from the back. "It's public record," I said calmly. "But that's not the problem. The problem is that your president, Ms. Vance, told you that I was the aggressor. She made you pay $150 each to sue me, claiming it was to protect your homes." I paused, looking directly at Pamela, who was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. "But she didn't tell you why she really needs that road," I said, and I pulled out the second document, the contract between Blue Heron LLC and Apex Resorts, and I projected it onto the screen behind me. "This is a contract signed by Pamela Vance 6 months ago, selling access rights to a resort developer for $150,000 upfront plus revenue sharing. But she can't deliver that access without my land. She is using your money, your defense fund, to fight a legal battle to protect her private profit." The room exploded. It wasn't a gradual shift, it was instant. The confusion turned to shock, and the shock turned to fury. Is this true? A woman in the front row stood up and screamed at Pamela. Did you steal our money to build a resort next to our houses? Pamela stammered, tried to stand up, tried to say it was for the good of the community, that the resort would raise property values, but nobody was listening. Another board member, a guy named Dave who looked like he was about to have a stroke, grabbed the contract copy I had left on the table and read it, his face turning redder by the second. You never disclosed this, Dave shouted at her. You recused yourself from nothing. This is fraud, Pamela. Chaos erupted. People were shouting demands for her resignation, demands for their money back, and through it all, Pamela just shrank into her chair, looking small, defeated, and utterly exposed. I stepped back from the podium, my part done, and watched as the community she had weaponized against me turned its barrel squarely on her. It took about 20 minutes for order to be restored, and in that time, an emergency motion was made. They voted to remove Pamela as president immediately, unanimous. They voted to launch a forensic audit of all HOA finances for the last 5 years, unanimous. And then, the new interim president, Dave, turned to me, looking exhausted and apologetic. Mr. Thorne, he said, the room falling quiet again. We didn't know. We were lied to. What do you want? Are you going to close the road? I looked at the faces in the crowd, tired parents, retirees, young couples, people who had been manipulated just like I had almost been. No, I said, I'm not going to punish you for her greed. I'm willing to sign a formal easement granting the HOA permanent access to the road. A collective sigh of relief washed over the room, palpable and deep. But, I added, raising a finger, there's a condition. The HOA will pay a lease fee of $12,000 a year. That's about $100 per house per year to cover maintenance, insurance, and taxes. And that contract with Apex Resorts? It dies today. No commercial traffic on my road. Ever. Dave looked at the other board members. They nodded quickly. Deal? Dave said. We accept. I walked out of that meeting into the cool night air, leaving the shouting and the recriminations behind me, and drove back to my property, the gravel crunching under my tires sounding different now. It sounded like mine. The fallout was swift and brutal for Pamela. The forensic audit revealed she had funneled nearly $30,000 of HOA funds into consulting fees for her own development project. The HOA sued her for every dime. Apex Resorts sued her for breach of contract and fraud, demanding their deposit back plus damages. She ended up having to sell her house in Pine Ridge and the 3 lots she owned just to pay the settlements and legal fees. She moved out of state about 3 months later. Rumors say she went to Florida, which seems fitting. As for me, I spent that winter building my dock, sitting out there in the cold, crisp air, watching the mist rise off the water. The HOA pays their lease on time, every year, and in a funny twist of fate, that $12,000 covers my property taxes and insurance with a little left over for fishing gear. I put up a sign at the entrance to the road, right where Pamela had blocked me that first day. It's a nice sign, routed in solid oak, painted white. It doesn't say private property or no trespassing. It says, Access Road, granted in partnership, December 2024. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch, drinking my coffee and watching the sun come up over the pines, I see the neighbors driving by. They wave now. Some of them even stop to drop off a pie or a 6-pack of beer, thanking me for saving the neighborhood from the resort that would have ruined their quiet streets. I wave back, but I mostly keep to myself. I learned a valuable lesson that year, one that stuck with me deeper than any engineering principle I ever learned in school. You can calculate the stress load of a bridge, you can measure the density of concrete, but you can never underestimate the destructive power of a person who thinks they own the world, and you should never, ever underestimate the strength of a man who knows he owns the ground he's standing on. So, looking back, I have to ask, would you have done what I did? Would you have offered them a lease and let them stay? Or would you have dropped a gate across that road and watched the chaos unfold? Some of my friends say I was too nice, that I should have squeezed them for more, but I think peace is worth more than money, and frankly, knowing that Pamela Vance is somewhere in a 1-bedroom apartment in Florida knowing she lost everything because she tried to bully the wrong engineer, well, that's priceless. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done And if you've ever had to deal with a neighbor like Pamela, share your story. I'd love to read it while I'm fishing. Stay safe, folks, and always check your property lines.